ser impartida por el doctor Charles Ferdinand. Como había comentado antes, es profesor en la Universidad de Nuevo México y es también el editor en jefe del IEEE Transaction Education. Entonces, el título de la charla, como bien veis aquí, en castellano, Atrapados en la tormenta, ingenieros, ética y el huracán Katrina. When you want, Charles, Chuck?
Chuck is fine.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Muchas gracias and buenos dias. And that's all the Spanish I know. So I did translate this into Spanish, and I hope I got it all correct. And those who were at dinner with me last night noticed I changed this from the Latin American way of doing it to your way. I did that this morning. So here it is in English. What I'm going to do is, although I know the overall theme of your conference is technology and education, I won't talk about any technology today at all. So what I will talk about is a very important topic, especially in the United States, but it will be very important here as well as people start moving in the direction of accreditation, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And that's ethics, and how do we teach ethics and ethical issues to engineering students. So I always like to give people an outline of where we're going, so that if I don't say something, you can tell me later that I missed stuff. But what I'll talk about is some introductory ideas, and what I really want to talk about is ethics education for engineers. And Hurricane Katrina is a case study that I've often used in teaching engineers some ethical issues, we'll use this as a model for how we do case studies in teaching ethics to engineers. So, just as sort of background information. Oh, and let me say, I'm very pretty informal kind of person. So if you want to ask questions at any time as I'm going through this, please do. I don't mind being interrupted. And in fact, the earlier you ask the question, the less chance I have of changing my story as we go along. So anyway, ask as you want to. Why do we teach ethics in education? I often get questions from people regarding that. They say the people are either ethical or they're not. And so why do we talk about it in engineering education? Well, the short answer to why we do it in engineering education is because in the United States we're required to. The accreditation by ABET, which stands for the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology, about 10 years ago they changed the criteria for accreditation. And one of the things that they required that we start doing is have an identifiable place in our curriculum where ethics was covered. Okay, they told us to. But beyond that, the ethics education that we all get from our parents, from society, really doesn't deal with issues related to engineering practice. And many of the issues related to engineering practice are slightly different, have a different flavor, a different understanding than the normal ethical issues we face in our day-to-day life. And so the purpose of teaching engineers ethics is to highlight the ethical issues that they might encounter as professional practicing engineers, and to have them have the ability to identify these problems and know what to do about them when they occur. So the nice thing about ABET is that it does allow us to design our own approach to meeting the requirement. So all that their requirement does is it says you must have ethics somewhere, but you can do it however you want. The way we do it at the University of New Mexico is we have a course that we teach to our fourth-year students. It meets once a week for a semester. It involves a lot of sort of basic information, ethical theories. We talk about the codes of ethics of engineering societies. So the IEEE, for example, has a code of ethics. Some of you may be familiar with it. We do a lot of case studies. We study ethical problem solving. And one of the areas that's very strongly covered is safety. Because one of the most fundamental duties of an engineer is to make sure that the products, the structures that she designs will be safe for people to use. So safety, and every code of ethics starts out, of the professional engineering societies, every one of them starts out saying that the health and safety of the public is our number one concern, our most important concern. And so we also discuss issues related to the societal impact of engineering, and as you'll see, we'll talk about something that had a lot of impact. And just for those of you who might not have heard about this, in the United States, and I'm sure in Spain, many engineers have to be licensed. Primarily the civil engineers who are designing buildings and bridges and et cetera. They have to be licensed. And in the United States, there's a requirement that licensed engineers have to have yearly training and education in engineering ethics. And so I do that in the state of New Mexico for our engineers. Just so you know, what do I know about ethics? I'm trained as an electrical engineer. But in case you want to know, I've written a book on engineering ethics. Here's the copy, or the cover of the third edition of the book. The fourth edition is going to be coming out this summer. So I taught a class for undergraduates in their fourth year, and I also do this, as I mentioned, for practicing engineers in New Mexico. All right, well, let me start by talking a little bit about safety. All right, so safety of engineered systems is an essential part of any engineer's duty. As I mentioned, every code of ethics of an engineering society talks about that. In fact, the one for the mechanical engineers and the civil engineers puts it most succinctly, very, very, very short. They say that safety is the paramount issue for engineers to worry about. Okay, so the safety of the people that use the devices we make. And one way to discuss safety and its ethical issues is to talk about accidents. Okay, because accidents are what happen when safety has been compromised. So always interesting to see how accidents play out. Now, when I talk to students about accidents, I like to sort of tear them down and classify them. I mean, I think we all have a sense of how accidents work, but I try to break it down into three categories. There's lots of ways we can talk about it. Procedural accidents are those that are caused by a failure of someone to follow an accepted practice or a procedure. Frequently you hear procedural accidents referred to as pilot error. You know, the time when an airplane pilot made a mistake and the airplane crashed. But it's much more. It's people who are doing maintenance who don't do it correctly. Or all kinds of accidents that you can hear about that were because someone didn't follow a procedure. And often an engineer designing a new system will say, well, here's the process that you follow to do a certain thing, and they don't always do it. And engineers have to think about the possibilities of people not doing it. I'll give you an example of a procedure. This is about airplanes as well. But there's a very large airplane that crashed near Chicago. It was taking off from Chicago. And this would have been in the early 1980s. It crashed and over 200 people were killed in the crash. And what happened is, as the plane was taking off, one of the engines underneath the wing came off and tore through part of the wing and destroyed a lot of the pilot's ability to control the plane and crash. Well, it turns out that the reason why this engine tore off was because the procedure that was supposed to be followed by the maintenance technicians to take the engine off and work on it and then put it back on wasn't followed because it took too long. So what the maintenance people did is they put the engine on a forklift and raised it up under the wing, and after a few times of doing that, they cracked the metal that was securing the engine to the wing. And once that was cracked, it came apart. And it was all because they didn't follow the procedure that had been designed. Now, does an engineer have a responsibility because maintenance people didn't follow the procedure? Not really. But, of course, you got to know that people aren't going to follow your procedures, and you should think about how to make the procedures easy and fast so that they won't avoid it. So anyway, engineers do have a responsibility for that. There are the more obvious types of accidents that are caused by engineered problems. And these are flaws in the design or failure in materials or components that the engineers didn't foresee. So very obviously we have a responsibility for that. There's also ones that are called systemic accidents. And these are caused by the fact that some engineered systems are so incredibly complicated and so amazingly complex that it's very difficult for them to operate correctly when you take into consideration all the different parts. Now, probably all accidents have some aspects of all three of these. But the systemic ones are most interesting because sometimes it is just a little tiny problem and then another little tiny problem, neither of which would matter, that when they happen together, suddenly cause this huge problem. And we have, engineers have responsibility for all of these kinds of accidents. So why do I talk about accidents when I talk about engineering ethics or when I teach engineering ethics to students? Our goal as educators in engineering is to ensure that our students can understand the nature of complex engineered systems and can understand where these accidents come from and know how to design systems in order to minimize the potential for accidents. And the beauty of why we talk about ethics is to also recognize that there are many things that go beyond engineering, such as politics, organizational structures of large bureaucracies and such that lead to accidents. And we'll see some of that as we talk about this hurricane that hit New Orleans. So, this is just a little bit more about these accidents. Now, maybe some of these aren't ones that you would necessarily know about here. But these are all accidents that occurred. This one says nuclear nightmare. This was not Japan. This is 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania in the United States. Back in about 1970-something, they had a problem with that caused some of the fuel to melt. But really, there's no huge problem here. It cost a lot of money to fix, but no human problems. I should update this now and do the Japan problem. This is in Alaska, where a huge oil tanker crashed, the Exxon Valdez, and dumped huge amounts of oil into Prince William Sound, this very pristine place in Africa. This, this is Bhopal. I forget which one this is. It'll tell us in a second here. Oh, that's Bhopal. They're both. Oh, Chernobyl. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay.